My name is Julian Brockhurst, and thank you for joining us for another webinar presented by Aprao on today's topic, the global RICS data standards and what it means for the property and tech industry. I've really been looking forward to this conversation for some time, so I'll jump straight in. Firstly, I would like to introduce our guest for today, Andrew Knight, Tech Partner Program and Data Standards at RICS, a highly experienced technology specialist and relationship manager with strong commercial background working for RICS, a global professional body for valuation, land, property, construction, and infrastructure. Currently leading the programs develop, enhance, and gain adoption of RICS's data standards that support data exchange between service providers, technology companies, and end users of data in the built environment and valuation sectors. So welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Julian.
Andrew, I thought we'd kick off today. I know you've got a big tech background and have probably seen a number of waves of innovation come through the industry over the years. It'd be interesting to hear where you think the property industry is on the adoption curve and why you think that is.
Well, it's a hugely mixed picture. I think for me, it reflects perhaps the fundamentals of the industry, which is that it's a fairly fragmented sector in terms of the number of participants, in terms of the size and their activities and their practice areas. So I think what I see both in my home market and as I talk to people around the world and travel the world pre-COVID is how different this adoption curve is in different jurisdictions and different asset types. So I think it is an incredibly mixed picture. You have at some extremes some people who really grasp the nettle here and really have very, very powerful digital equivalents of their assets that are doing incredibly powerful things and really have a very deep knowledge of the assets they deal with. And at the other extreme, we are effectively in certain areas in a kind of an Edwardian Victorian era of bits of paper that may have been digitized, turned into PDFs. And in some respects, I know we were chatting earlier, that the kind of proliferation, which in many ways is great in terms of innovation around prop tech and contech, means that we have many, many more silos now of data in different formats. So it's a really, really mixed picture. And I remain hugely optimistic of the power and the opportunity here to digitize the built environment. But we are in this incredibly mixed picture where certain participants have made tremendous progress, digitizing leases, geospatial information. And yet at the other end, it can be incredibly hard to have even basic information available on an asset for a due diligence purpose or a fire safety purpose. So I think it's an incredibly mixed picture, but huge opportunity still.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. As you say, sort of talking earlier, and we'll get into that in just a second on that sort of proliferation and the number of prop techs entering the market. But, how can we progress the tech industry in the property sector in terms of that adoption, right? Like I think COVID, as you mentioned, has been this huge catalyst for digitization and adoption. Would ESG probably be the next big catalyst, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a number of positive, some of which things like COVID, for example, are also a very sad thing to have as a catalyst. But I think there are a number of things that are driving the kind of digitization of the built environment. ESG will be a huge issue because clearly now, particularly investors are very concerned about assets looking forward and thinking, well, do I have the data that gives me a sense of their ESG credentials? And if I don't, am I looking at real risk here in terms of either stranded assets, the cost of retrofits, or indeed a kind of a brown haircut, a brown discount in terms of capital values and rental values when I don't have a building that's actually up to scratch? And depending on the jurisdiction, there may even now be restrictions on whether you're actually able to lease or rent that building, for example, depending on its quality and therefore the costs that might go with that. So I think there's a real driver now to get data, particularly around that ESG side of things. And I think that's really highlighting in many cases what I touched on earlier, that there are certainly quite large pockets still of the industry where we don't have good data on our assets. I think if you look at the kind of commercial real estate world and think about some of the listed vehicles out there and the fact there are also now fractional ways of potentially owning real estate, I think data will have to become more open. In some respects, it's quite a sort of an opaque marketplace in many cases, the built environment. So I think there will also be a sense that data should be more open, should be shared within reason more freely. I think that will push in a good direction. I think there is this direction of travel about people understanding that we do need better data on our assets, and that also within reason should be shared more freely as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. The sharing of data, I think, is a huge one, and for a long time has been protected as my value. But I mean, focusing more specifically on RICS, I know you've been obviously working on the data standard and promoting the data standard that you guys are building. Can you sort of give us and the audience a sort of a bit of overview, like what is it, and where do you hope it will lead us? Like what barriers are you looking to break down?
Indeed. Well, essentially, we started from the premise that our profession is out there measuring, reporting, assuring information, and that information increasingly has to become digital, has to be transferred from machine to machine. And so we started really from the premise that actually we need to think about this from a standards perspective, whether it's valuation standards, whether it's overall due diligence, whether it's standards around cost reporting right through the life cycle. Whether it's around the prosaic things of how big are your buildings. So we took a stance 2 or 3 years ago to say, well, actually, we need to build a common standard, a common way of naming and exchanging information on the built environment that really fundamentally would support our members and our profession in exchanging that information. So it's around making sure that we understand consistent naming, that we also understand that this information has to be assured and that provenance should be captured as well, and to really try and aim to be an interface between systems. We're not in any way implying with our data standard that everybody should copy it with their internal models, but we're saying, look, when you begin to exchange information, we need this common language, this common understanding of what we describe, how we describe it, what kind of unit of measurements have we used, if we've used different kind of standards to measure those values, whether they're space or capital values, what standard have we used? And we're open enough to realize that it always won't necessarily be an RICS standard, but if you are going to report the value of a building, the size of a building, you should be consistently describing it in that consistent way and saying, well, which standard did we use? And then also from that kind of professional assurance perspective, make sure that we can trace that data back. And indeed, as we've touched on around sharing, making sure that that data has information around it that says, well, who can we share this with? Because there are clearly limitations on how you can share data. And so what we're aiming to do is work with various stakeholders, governments, software houses, property firms, say, well, look, let's use this as a way of sharing information. Let's use this way of mapping one system to the next, because there will be this proliferation in the short to medium term of different systems out there. But can we have this common way of exchanging data that has the provenance? Where did it come from? Who's assured it? Common nomenclature, common naming, and also that sense of, well, how did we measure this? What standard did we use? Who was the professional who did this? And just get this information to flow around in a well-governed way, because it shouldn't be a free-for-all, but it should be governed, it should be consistent, and people should then be able to build these digital equivalents of a piece of land, a building, whatever the kind of the asset is.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about that sort of proliferation of different players within the market, I mean, we recently released a prop tech map to give SME, from the perspective of an SME developer, a bit of an overview into the tech options available. And since then, sort of another 40 plus companies have come forward wanting to be included in this map. And that's just in Australia, right? So, I mean, I'm guessing, this standard is aimed at getting everyone on the same page to a certain degree, as you say, or maybe
exactly.
Sort of, in some ways, RICS being that sort of transition, almost like an API between different data sets and standardizing that. So, I mean, go ahead.
No, carry on, Jim.
I was just going to say, so what can tech firms provide the industry to be able to link this data? Like you touched on it before, but what are some of the important parts of linking everyone together?
Well, I think it's realizing, if I think of one example in a European market where the banks and the valuers have come together with software houses to actually make sure there is a fairly seamless machine-to-machine way of actually passing valuations around, to make sure that actually the banks can send out the instructions, the valuations can come back in a set format, in a common format. And so what you've basically got rid of PDFs, you've got rid of effectively Word documents, you've managed to structure a process from end to end in both directions, where instructions go out, valuations come back, and the whole process is much more efficient. And it still doesn't stop value is adding value in terms of commentary and narrative, but it means that the actual values, the instructions are going back and forth. And I think what's really important is that the various prop tech operators out there should understand that they will need to work within this ecosystem, because I think the fragmented nature of real estate in the built environment means that when you're assembling your kind of digital twin, your equivalent of an asset, quite often you're putting in data from lots of different sources. So no one operator is going to have a monopoly on all the data. You're going to need to get data from your local registry, cadastral systems, taxation issues. You're going to have data coming from lots of different sources. And so it's unlikely that one particular vendor, one particular actor has got all the data. We're going to look at these islands of data that a data standard like ours seeks to join together. And so it's that working together to assemble these full digital equivalents of assets that I think prop tech firms and other actors need to understand they're part of that story, and they need to help by assembling this data for customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in your mind, is there anyone in the market at the moment that is sort of leading the way or having the biggest impact? I know you're a big fan of BIM. Is that sort of one where you think there's a sort of a lot of that data exchange going on?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, but BIM has certainly led. I think the challenge there, of course, is BIM originally started very much obviously from the construction design cycle. The challenge is to get the kind of BIM methodology and the rigor you have around some of the detail you have on a BIM model into the live asset, so that you end up with what BIM, I think, was always intended to have, which was that full database of information around the asset, not just the design, construction, geometry piece. And obviously with 4, 5, 6, 7D BIM, you do get to that further definition, but I think there's still a long way to go. And of course, many participants in the market still aren't BIMing their buildings. And I think the one thing we have to remember in the built environment is one of the huge challenges, and I forget the exact statistics, but by 2040, 2050, we will still be dealing with buildings, the majority of which already exist or will have been built without BIM, without a building code. So, it's so much a retrofit issue now about how do we get digital data on existing assets, because the majority won't be BIMmed and they won't be, they won't have a BIM model retrofitted on them necessarily. So it's how do we begin to build this quality data on assets when we don't have BIM models for the vast majority.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a prop tech startup perspective, I think, and don't quote me on this number, I think it's about 80% of the assets that will be around in 2040 already exist. And it's about, you can build and design a new building today with all of the inclusions, all of the technology built in, and to satisfy ESG hurdles and stuff like that. But how do you get 80% of the market to get there without knocking it over and starting again? And I think a lot of the startups and prop techs really need to think about that and how they play a role in that story, more so than just coming in and being like, hey, we can provide you a better HVAC, we can provide you with an IoT that tracks people through your front door. But how does that play a part of a bigger role in that sharing of data with everyone? Again, like you're just providing one little subsection of that data. And I guess to that sort of mindset shift of data being the source of value, which I think is where everyone is at today, to where the analytics is the future source of value. Like, again, sharing my data that I have in my company with competitors and or anyone else in the industry is sort of it's a gray area. It's an uneasy feeling right now. But do you think we'll ever get to a point where everyone freely shares their data and my value to the market, my value to my client or my customer is my perspective, my analytics, and what I can derive from that?
I think I'd like to think that. I think there'll always be an element of people extracting value from the data they have. But I think you're right. I think the long-term trend, and I heard that this phrase was first, as you've just articulated, was actually said to me by somebody in the construction sector many years ago, where they were beginning to realize that actually simply hoarding a small percentage of the market data that they had access to, when the real value was having that full view of the data set. And then, as you say, the value and the charge, as it were, from their perspective was on that analytics, what they could do with the data, how they could actually help their clients inform their decisions. And it's funny, in a previous life, I worked in an ad serving company, and we basically did analytics for the kind of FMCG market, looking at buyer behavior. And we had a database with lifestyle and transactional information on every household in the US and the UK. And we did, well before people used words like big data or AI, we had regression models and shade models looking at all these huge numbers of data in a room full of Linux machines. And, the interesting thing there was that was a data pool of everybody putting their data in, recognizing that even as competitors, it was better to pool the data with their direct competitors and then have us as an independent analytics house doing all that analysis. So in certain markets, in certain sectors, that journey's already happened. They realize that actually it's better to have 80-90% of the market view in terms of data by sharing it. And then the power is the analytics. And I think in that sense, for better or for worse, real estate has almost depended on that kind of siloed, protected data rather than recognizing that it's the analytics where the real value is derived. But I think it'll take some time to get there because I think there are some market incentives that people enjoy this information asymmetry. They enjoy the fact that they have a set of data that nobody else has. But I think it will change. And once again, things like ESG, the more listed vehicles we have for commercial real estate, and indeed even in residential, I think the drive to get residential properties more sustainable, I think will force more openness with data, and then it's down to the analytics. What do you do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, focusing back on the RICS, would it be fair to say that you're looking to continuously move your members up the value chain by supporting them with like tech and data? And if so, where will they sort of be in 5 years?
Well, in some respects, the profession has always taken technology on board. I think we're seeing a particular wave at the moment in terms of the amount of change that's going to take place. We certainly feel the profession has a huge role in curating the data because at the end of the day, this data is used for analytical purposes to make financial decisions, and therefore the provenance, the quality of that data is paramount. So we think that actually it's even more important that as we digitize the real estate and the property industry, that actually there's a profession there to curate, to manage that data and make sure that actually people can rely on it. There's always a danger that just because you see a number on a computer screen that it must be right. And I think we still need that professional skepticism. We still need people to be, as I say, curating, gathering that data, because ultimately, yes, we have IoT sensors, we have a degree of automated data collection, but there's still a lot of occasions where you need boots on the ground, people looking at physical assets to assess what's going on. Or indeed, even if you've done a very clever lease abstraction, you still need ultimately people to look at that and make sure the information is correct. So I think our role will be going up the value chain. There'll certainly be issues, I think, particularly where data collection and evaluation may be much more automated, where we can take tasks away from the profession to free them up to do more value-added work. But I think the digitization of real estate presents many more opportunities than downsides in terms of requiring professionals, let's say, to assure and curate that data. But I think it will enable, and I think in particular about valuation, valuers to do more high value work and free up a lot of the time that has been spent acquiring data.
Absolutely. I think that there's always going to be that room, as you say, of professional judgment, overall automation. There's always going to be that sort of art versus the science that will always have that human element to it. And probably the way that we're going to stay one step ahead of AI, like with Aprao, the reporting side of things and that sort of one-click reporting that valuers can use the platform to generate. That's just another 2 hours back at the office of using Word and Excel to generate the reports. That doesn't, I guess, there's no real value add there from the human side of things. It's more about just getting that automation out of the road and actually looking at the asset and getting that data and interpreting that. I think is the key way forward there.
Yeah.
So as sort of get to a close, I'll keep monitoring the question side of things. So please, if you're listening in, feel free to throw a question our way. But Andrew, why do you think innovation or that sort of constant search for improvement is so essential for everyone? No matter the size and or the industry.
Well, I think that there are various reports that have been, I think, understandably critical over the years about the lack of productivity improvement within, if you think of the construction phase of real estate, and people obviously want to get as best value as possible out of real estate. I think with certainly with countries like the UK, the effect of COVID's had over here in terms of people working from home. I think there's a huge need. We've touched on ESG a number of times to make real estate assets perform better in lots of ways in terms of their impact from a carbon perspective, but also in terms of places to work, encouraging people to actually want to come into the office. So I think there's a lot of areas around productivity, cost savings, obviously, reduction in the kind of materials that we're using, making sure that we can actually, there's a big argument now about, let's not knock buildings down, let's retrofit, let's make sure we don't have to have much new construction. I think there's lots of areas where, and it comes back so many times to this ESG thing, where I think we need to use innovation to make places more attractive to people to occupy and use, and we need those places to cost less, both in terms of fiscal cost, but also impact on the planet. So I think, the whole area has to be more productive, and certainly in the UK, bringing back an example from my home market with the Grenfell incident, the terrible fire we had, there's a lot of focus now on fire safety. So, and ultimately, I think it might sound slightly utopian, but I think we have to almost hope a situation where, in the same way we know the kind of materials and components that have gone into aeroplanes and cars, we should know what's gone into our buildings to maintain them, to operate them, to know if we have some safety issues. We construct buildings and run them, and we barely know the kind of assets we have in them in many cases. So I think there's a real drive here for quality in the built environment, reduce its impact on the environment, and make it even more cost effective and more attractive to use assets.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So no questions have come through, but I guess one last chance for the audience as we wrap up here. But for those of tuning in today, what's the best way for the audience to get in touch with you or stay abreast of the RICS, tech and data standards and where you guys are at?
Well, if you go to rics.org and if you search on RICS Tech Partner, you'll see our Tech Partner Program. Aprao, one of the members of that, and there's a link to our data standard there, and you can get in touch. So please go onto our website, search for the RICS Tech Partner, and have a look, and you'll see links to Aprao, other firms, and indeed our data standard. And we're keen to talk to actors right across the world. We are a global body, and we're very keen to, from our public interest mandate, just to improve the built environment and make sure data flows more freely in a controlled and quality way.
Great. And yeah, I think I'd encourage everyone to please do get in touch. It is critical, especially from my perspective in that sort of startup world, prop tech world, to get in touch and set yourself up right from the beginning. But thank you very much for your time, Andrew, and thank you to everyone today who's joined us live as well. As we bring more and more leaders from within the development ecosystem, please reach out to us directly if you have any topics or individuals you'd like us to get in touch with. But until next time, please do take care.
Thanks, Julian. Bye.
Goodbye.